Hi, and welcome to Serenity Now, a place for entrepreneurs to ask questions, learn, get connected, and be inspired. Join us as we talk about all things business and the search for the ever-elusive Serenity Now in both business and personal life.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Serenity Now for Entrepreneurs. Today, Candace and I, we're the only two that are able to be on with you today, but we're going to dive into the very, very tough business of talking about interprovincial trade barriers and how the tariffs that have been imposed have brought up this conversation again. And Rita, who can't be here, wrote an interesting note, and I just want to read from it to you so you'll understand sort of the context of our talk today. So she says, this week we're diving into interprovincial trade, how breaking down barriers between Canadian provinces could unlock billions in economic growth, drive innovation, and empower entrepreneurs coast to coast. While others look outward, maybe it's time to look inward. Canada has incredible talent, rich resources, and boundless creativity. By improving how we work together from province to province, we can strengthen our industries, make our economy more resilient, and create the kind of ecosystem where small businesses and bold ideas thrive without having to rely so heavily on foreign markets. That's sort of where we're going to go with things today, and I'm going to be the first to admit that I know very little about interprovincial trade barriers. Not where I deal with clients. I'm not usually on that side of the business cycle. I'm usually dealing with clients in the R&D side. So first of all, Candace, have you a resource that would help us and our listeners understand what interprovincial trade barriers really means? They talk about a lot in the news, but what does it really mean?
Well, I have to tell you that I have found that, there's a lot of information out there, like scads and scads of it, especially around tariffs, and they're good, they're bad, and, it's going to kill Canada's economy or it's going to make Canada's economy better. I don't know which is the truth, because a lot of the reporting, unfortunately, is biased. It's very difficult to find unbiased information. However, I get information from the Royal Bank quite often, and I'm sure somebody thinks that they're biased too, but at least I find their information informative. It gives me enough information that I can think through and maybe make my own decisions. So one of the featured insights that I found from the Royal Bank, it's called the 6 questions about the significance of interprovincial trade barriers in Canada. So in reading this, I can see why people are complaining about tariffs, but if you drill down into our interprovincial trade, things aren't really that different. They talk about the fact that we have geographical issues. We have a large country. It is large, in a geographic area. This is a trade barrier. We have to go over the Rockies to ship things. There's nothing we can do about that. We got to work with that one.
Not to mention the north, which is sparsely populated and very, very large.
Yes, like mass areas of the country. But our provinces are given a lot of autonomy in running their own provinces. And each of the provinces seem to have specialities that they want to protect. So each of these provinces have put in barriers to trade, not only outside of the country, but in between the provinces. At a high level, this just seems asinine to me. If you think about our country, as physically large as it is, the number of people in our country is approximately the same as California. So to me, restricting trade between our countries limits the economies of scale that we could achieve as a country.
Do you mean trade between the provinces and territories, or do you mean trade between Canada and the United States?
If we can't trade in between our provinces effective, where's our market, right? Tariffs, we have no control outside of our country. We only have control inside of our country. And our market is relatively small if you look at Canada as a whole, and it becomes smaller if you look at it on a provincial level. So it seems to me having restrictions to trade in between the provinces just doesn't make economic sense at a fundamental level.
Okay, so Candace, we've talked about these barriers, but what are they? Do they literally prohibit people from outside that province trading in a certain product or good within the province, or does it just add a tax? How do we do it? Like, how do they do it? Is it regulatory? I don't really understand this.
Well, the only one that I really know a lot about is regulation of CPAs in Canada. And I can tell you that, we'll use that as an example. So the regulation of CPAs in Canada are administered at a provincial level. So to be a CPA registered in BC, slightly different from Alberta and from all the other provinces and territories.
Even though you're a CPA in Canada, you can't just pick up and go to Saskatchewan and start a practice there.
No. You have to meet the requirements. I have to say, on a regulatory basis, Saskatchewan is one of the easier mobility-wise. Like, it's a little bit easier for me to go to Saskatchewan than it is some of the other provinces. I wouldn't even attempt Quebec. I don't speak French, but the regulation is so different. It's a barrier for me to do business in that province.
Okay, so that's one of the things. I know, being involved in the business that I'm in, that we have certain barriers with our dairy and our egg producers. We have quota and we have protectionism through those quotas. Is there something similar between the provinces, or?
I think for wine, I don't understand it a lot, but I do know that there is a restriction for wine between BC and Alberta.
Right there, that's one of the barriers that we're talking about. I'm sure there are many, many more. Well, we've talked about two. We've talked about a service, the CPA, and we've also talked about a product, wine, and how those things we cannot trade freely province to province. So do you think that this, I don't want to use his name, but American administration is pushing us to look at these barriers and to be more realistic about allowing trade freely between provinces? Do we think that's going to happen, or is that just something that's just such a big archaic monster that they can't get rid of?
I don't have a good answer for that.
Maybe that's just a question for our listeners. Maybe that's something that we as Canadians have to decide that we want to see, because, the alternative is to rely on exports when we could have a bigger market if we could sell across our country. And maybe it takes Canadians to think that way and to ask that question for these things to change. And I think this is what this whole exercise is about, is you and I are not experts on this subject. We have very little knowledge of it, just things that we've read, things we've heard. But we want to start a conversation so that others will start the conversation with their local MP or their local representative, that we all need this to happen in Canada. We need many things to happen to remain sovereign, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I do think it's going to take a mind shift, because, you go back to the eggs and the dairy. That's a international trade barrier, if you will, with the, protecting that industry. So if we're protecting industry across the border, and you're protecting it east to west, the market becomes smaller and smaller for our businesses to survive, right? It doesn't matter whether you're selling things, or you're selling produce, or you're selling services. You're starting to create this smaller and smaller market. And the only part that we have control of is the interprovincial. We can't decide what another country is going to do, but we can definitely make ourselves more nimble, I think. But it will require a mind shift, because we do have a protectionist kind of approach to things.
We have had that for a very, very long time. And I remember shopping in the States a long time ago. When you brought back clothing or you brought back footwear, it wasn't even worth bringing it back, because we were protecting our Canadian industry so heavily that the duty and taxes on that made it almost cost prohibitive to bring back, even from a vacation, a pair of shoes or a piece of clothing. But, the sad part of that is, I think, I may be misquoting here, but I think that was part of the problem, is that we were protecting that industry. And when we stopped doing that, that industry is virtually gone from Canada. I remember even in East Vancouver, there used to be far more manufacturing of clothing. We don't do that anymore. I wonder if that isn't one of the reasons.
Yeah, I'm sure if we had the cost of bringing things back and we could only shop locally, those industries were not able, or those clothing manufacturers not able to ship outside of the country easily either, I'm guessing. So
at the end of the day, is protectionism good or is it not good? Should we protect businesses that might otherwise fail? That's really the question. And, should we allow companies to have the whole market of Canada? That would be an awesome, amazing thing if we could free up trade between our own provinces and rely on ourselves a little bit more and create an environment where the administration and the paperwork doesn't bog you down to trade across our Canada.
Yeah, I know. It's just, we're creating 9 or 13 or 12. I don't know, we talked about it before, the number of provinces and territories. We're creating little micro markets, and it's not serving us anymore. It's time to change.
What does it take to change? That's really a huge question. It takes time. Yeah, it does take time. And it also takes people to ask for that change. And it takes people to have those conversations with key influencers. And it takes associations and it takes lobbyists and it takes politicians to listen. People are listening right now. It is disruptive.
Major disruption also increases the speed of change. Take COVID, for instance, the pace of change because people had to. So maybe in a way, the political climate from down south give us a bit of a favor if it pushes us in the direction of interprovincial trade a little bit quicker.
I agree with you. Disruption, there's nothing like a good stirring of the pot to get people thinking a little differently. And I said the other day, this is COVID 2.0. I know it's not COVID, but it feels a little bit like COVID 2.0. I'm hearing from clients, specifically ones in aluminum, how even before the tariffs came into effect, just the discussion of it stopped their orders, 65% of their business being from the United States. So that kind of disruption, you bet those people are thinking differently and having to pivot and having to change what they're doing and hopefully find either another market for their products, supplementary business line, or carving back and getting more efficient and more profitable. But it's crazy. It is disruption.
Maybe we'll become part of the EU. I heard this crazy story about how you could only be part of the EU if you shared a land border with Europe. And because there's this one little island that we share with Denmark up in the north there somewhere, apparently we do share a border with Europe. So Peggy, with all of this going on, are you shopping differently at the grocery stores these days?
Well, I've just been in Asia for a bit, so I haven't really shopped very much. But yes, I do think differently. We just canceled the trip to Hawaii, and not because I think that there's a threat in Hawaii. I just don't want to be a part of the potential detainment, looking through my phone, etc., that may occur at a border point. While I probably think it's rather safe to go, you just don't know how people are going to treat you either. We were in Asia and had two very different experiences with Americans. You could tell exactly what their mindset was. One was, I am so sorry. And you knew where they were from, California, etc. And the other one was like, oh, you don't like our president, do you? And I knew where they were from. I love the idea that Canadians are strong on their position on not traveling to the US. I like that Canadians are strong on their position that they are buying Canadian products. And I just want to say, I think these things should have gone on before this. And again, another thing to make us look inside our country first. We watch an awful lot of American TV. We eat a lot of American products. We eat at a lot of American chains. We buy a lot of American everything. So if we are focused a bit more on within our country, it can only be a good thing.
I agree. Hopefully it brings some new innovation, like trying to replace some of those things up here from a Canadian source.
And better products. Like maybe that's what we need. Maybe we need better products. Maybe we've just relied very heavily on things that are produced outside of Canada and specifically in the United States. Maybe we just need to, like you say, get creative, make some good things here. I don't know what the state of manufacturing is in Canada, although I do remember an exodus in the 90s very much to China. Of course, I deal with a lot of manufacturing clients, and I remember them looking for alternative ways of manufacturing, first in China, then later in Mexico, because it became just cost prohibitive to manufacture in Canada. Can that change? I doubt it with the cost of living here, with the lack of workers. I just don't see how we can, fully put a whole manufacturing businesses back in place. Would we have the people? Would we have the housing for the people if we plan to immigrate, allow immigration to fill those spots? And can we afford the product that comes out of Canadian manufacturing at the costs that we have here? I don't know.
I am curious about, and hopefully, I can learn more about it now that I'm thinking about it. But you hear stories of things where, like for gasoline, we mine the oil out of the ground, but then we send it down south to get refined and buy it back. Like that just doesn't make sense to me. Like, why don't we have our own refining like that?
So one of the biggest criticisms of Canada that I have heard in this whole news thing going on lately is that we are rich in raw materials, but we don't get any value added dollars on them before we export them. So we send lumber, crude oil, mining resources out of the country without processing them. And we're missing the boat on that.
Lots of different, not just oil, but yeah, like you said, the lumber. I'm sure there's lots of things, water, hydro.
Exactly. Maybe we were just too rich in those resources and it made us lackadaisical, but they're not an endless supply. And we maybe need to start thinking about how to get the best bang for our buck out of those resources that God gave us.
Well, I think we could possibly wrap this up. Do you have any final thoughts or things that you wanted, aha moments that you want to share with us before we wrap it up, Peggy?
I think the biggest thing I want to say is that we are just having a conversation about this. We have no expert knowledge in this area. This is just a hot topic. And, questions should be put out there so that people talk about this with the people that matter, the people that are knowledgeable, the people that can make change. And everybody talking about it provokes change. So I think that's our goal today. And please don't fact check us. We are just winging it here today.
I agree. Similar thought I had was that I want to learn more. Hopefully I'll pay better attention to what's going on and things like that. And hopefully, we've raised some thoughts that will make people think a little bit more and maybe look into it on their own and maybe talk to the people that can actually make things change. So I agree with you there for sure. Start changing our mindset.
Right. Start changing our mind and start being vocal. Like stand up for our country.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us today on our poorly informed discussion of tariffs and whatnot. But I feel that probably there's a lot of Canadians in the same position. So maybe it makes some of us think a little bit more and ask the right questions. If you found our discussion thought-provoking, hopefully you can pass this podcast on to somebody else. And I don't know about Serenity, but hopefully it gives them something to think about. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Candace.
We hope you enjoyed this episode and picked up some good tips and best practices that would benefit your entrepreneurial journey. Remember, none of the content in this podcast should be relied upon as standard legal or business advice. Always consult a professional for your specific business. You may know someone who could benefit from this podcast. Please share it with your business community, and perhaps it can give an entrepreneur you know some serenity now.